Greetings, everyone, on this full moonlit night. And I'm still feeling very moved by that last poem. It shifted me in a particular way. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. It's a bittersweet honor that we are gathered in this manner. And I hope that that we're at a moment of hope somewhere in all this. So when Sarah asked me to read something this evening, it was funny because I was looking through my dad's papers. I was sorting through his effects, his papers. He kept a lot of papers. And he was a political activist. And anyway, amongst them, I found this newsletter from the Marlon Downs Memorial Trust. And Marlon Downs was killed in police custody in Harlesden in London in 1997. And it made me think about how the struggle is ahead of us and it is behind us and it is ongoing. And I wanted to flag that, and it also made me think about what would I read this evening, and I realized that I wanted to read some work that connected to state violence and the Black body from quite a historical context. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my next book, which is a novel in verse. I've been working on it for a long time. I spent the last 6 months in LA at the Promise Institute for Human Rights as their writer in residence, thinking about poetry and law and how they might interconnect. And I'm writing a big essay for that, but I don't want to read that now because I felt, I mean, it was strange because I was in America and I was in the West and I was on that land that in fact the land where UCLA is based is the land of the Tongva people. I started to write about the book itself has been ongoing, but I got to this point where it was, I started to write about the history of America. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the book briefly. It's called Top Doll. It centers around the story of a woman, Uget Clark, who died aged 105 in a hospital in New York. She was the daughter of one of the richest men in America, a robber baron, a corrupt senator, William Clark. And she didn't leave her house she didn't go outside for 80 years. She didn't speak to anyone but her accountant, her lawyer, and her collection of dolls. And so this is her story, and it's written from the perspective. It's written by the dolls that lived in the apartment with her. And so there are 4 main narrators. There's Miss Ting, who you might be able to see in the background somewhere. She's up on the shelf behind a Jamaican rag doll. There is Dolly, who is porcelain, antique French, very, very fragile. There is Lady Mamiko, a Japanese doll. And then the doll that I want to read from this evening is the General. And he is a Black rag doll, also American. While Dolly only speaks in sonnets, and I've written 9 coronas of sonnets for her, the General either sings in blues or writes in prose. And I think at the heart of this, I very much had the voice of it's kind of like the voice of my father, who was from Jamaica, who was a Garveyite. And it kind of also has I suppose, an essence of Frederick Douglass, of Oludua Equiano at its heart as well. For the American audience there, and in fact for the British too, I'll ask you to really use your imaginations here with the accent. And I'll read it as I read it. So this is an excerpt from Top Dole, where the general talks about how he came to be. Every man has his nemesis, each man his muse. And truth be uttered, nothing is more egregious than the distinct sensation of being trapped within a situation utterly outside of one's own personal control. Imagine then, if you will, the jaws of a vast, slobbering, halitosis-ridden beast, clenching shut over one's midriff, so that for a moment the prospect of actual corporeal division is less a possibility than it is a likely numerical outcome. Consider this a baptism of sorts, where the purifying torrents of the Colorado River are in fact a waterfall of lukewarm drool that sinks into the very fiber of one's being. Inhale again that foul breath, pungent as the aroma of steaming donkey dung, as you ride, strapped to an overburdened saddlebag with your face directly downwind to the mule in front's behind. That one could emerge from this experience stronger, more resilient, and ready to battle another day is a triumph, not only of the spirit, but testament to poor dear Miss Bessie's estimable skills with needle, thread, thimble, and dexterous fingertips that did fashion this invincible body. This rough and tumble, as it is euphemistically ascribed, was the way with Byron and Turk and the much esteemed Snooks, for each hound pricked its ears up regardless, each wagged its stink-wafting tail with the same mindless enthusiasm as had its father and its father's father. And each loved nothing better than to grasp its master's competing object of desire in its blackening gums and hide it under a bushel, as if my rag-stuffed frame were no more sentient than a table leg. And yet, truth be articulated, there was no creature of 2 legs or 4 to whom young Junior was more devoted. But more of young Master William Clark II and his wretched spittle-spouting canine in due course. Now I ask, dear reader, that you close your eyes and allow the ripple of your thoughts to wander back along a dark and treacherous path, where frontiersmen and fur trappers followed in the moccasin-clad footsteps of those who knew the songs and stories of hard earth and prairie grass, to a place of snow-capped peaks and eucalyptus campfires, of sage fields, cacti, creeks, and caverns, where men of soft flesh, white skin, and little scruple came to plunder our gracious mother's seemingly infinite bounty. Let me take you far from the cosmopolitan, elevated apartments of New York's Upper East Side, where I currently reside. Instead, cast your mind back to that most uncivil war, when the rape and ransacking of the West was rudely interrupted by a battle between North and South, which, despite its pretensions to a nobler cause, was in reality no more than one white flesh vying with another for constitutional supremacy. General Obadiah Livingston Little Rock Yellow Bird. That is my full, unabridged and endowed name. And it is hitherto undisclosed, a fact that the general, as referred to, is not George Armstrong Custer, the gonorrhea-ridden Union Army officer with whom my flesh mother, Eliza Brown, found her life deeply entwined, but another, more appropriate warrior. Toussaint Louverture, General Jacobin Noir and revolutionary extraordinaire, who had led the incarcerated of Haiti into that historic and victorious rebellion. He who liberated our land of the high priestess Maniquin clan, where the veil between soft flesh and dull hive was worn thin as any hand-me-down Sunday best, where a fat full moon blazed its path through tavern windows in flickering candlelight, as marauding pirates and press-ganged sailors swigged frothy draughts by the dozen, blind to the true identities of the grinning revolutionaries and buxom maroons who surrounded them on stealthy reconnaissance, so as to gather muskets and coordinates through the intoxicated waggling of rum and ale-loosened tongues, where legions of martyr mannequins sacrificed arms, legs, lungs, and necks as cushions for carefully placed pins to help bring a nation of whip-wielders to its knees. It was Grandmammy Bessie who stitched this history into my striped breeches and matching dicky bow from a worn waistcoat she'd wheedled out of old Mr. Price. She who collected used cloth, rags and horsehair from the manes and tails of prized palominos with which to stuff me. She who haggled hard for those 2 matching ivory buttons at the haberdashery. A little piece of Africa, she'd muttered under her breath, as the needle pierced her fingertip for blood that dripped upon the cloth, and she fastened tight the thread. Thank you.